So this week is parashat Naso, N-A-S-O, not to be confused with Nassau County. I think that's in.
Never heard of that.
I think it's in New Jersey. Naso means to carry.
What?
To carry.
Carry.
Or to elevate. Or to lift. And we have here a continuation of a theme that we encountered last week, which is a somewhat technical or administrative theme. Remember last week the opening of the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. Why is it called Numbers in English, even though Bamidbar in Hebrew means in the desert? Because it starts with the census, right? So we spoke about the census last week, and the census continues for different families in who of the Levites, right, from Eli's neck of the woods, and basically they're counting the men. From the ages of 30 to 50 who are eligible to take part and serve in the tent of meeting.
So the 20s to 30s, at the prime of carrying, I mean, you're fully vigorous.
Right.
They don't use them.
It's very interesting. So what can we possibly infer from that is that, thank you very much, is that certain jobs are not just about the physical execution and performance of the work, but it also requires a certain maturation of spirit and temperament in order to perform them. Right? Maybe this is not a good example, it's off the top of my head, but we have an appalling reality in Africa of child soldiers. It could take 10, 12, 14, 15-year-olds. The argument could be made that a 15 or 16-year-old teenager is actually very fit. But is that person internally ripe? Is it correct morally, spiritually, to send somebody at that age in harm's way, right? And we don't feel that way, right? So according to all the human rights groups and the Human Rights Convention, we see that as an appalling thing. So similarly, what did they do? They used to carry the tabernacle. It was like a procession, and maybe in order to perform certain rites, you have to be of a certain maturity of age, not only physical maturity of body.
Spiritual.
Right. So he talks about the different who carried which clans, large families. In English, in Arabic, probably Leah knows the language, there's the word hamula. You know the word hamula?
Hamula.
Hamula is like a clan of families. It's like the extended family writ large. So it's really about those extended families. Each one of them, they would carry the tabernacle's tapestries or whatever it may be.
They're like tribes. Tribes?
Sub-tribes, if you like. Sub-tribes. And there is an interesting formulation that we find in the Parsha, that there are two kinds of work. Avodah in Hebrew means work. So in modern Hebrew, if you say avodah, like I'm going to the avodah, A-O-V-D-A-H, it means I'm going to work. Perform my job, my mundane job. Avodah in rabbinic Hebrew, in spiritual Hebrew, means spiritual service. Avodat Hashem means serving God. Right? Tefillah, prayer, is called avodah shebalev. the avodah of the heart, the service of the heart. So there's a very interesting formulation we find in our parasha, that it says that there were two kinds of work that took place. One is called avodat hamasa. Masa means carrying a weighty load. Like soldiers on a hike carrying a fellow soldier on a stretcher, or carrying heavy equipments on their backs. So in Jewish American English, that's the work of the schlepping, of the carrying around stuff, right? But there is another kind of work that's mentioned here that's not the work of the schlepping, right, of the carrying around and arranging things, and that's the avodat ha'avodah, which means the work of the spiritual service itself. And what Rashi says in this context is something very beautiful. The avodah, the work of the carrying, was the physical labor, the technical labor, the administrative labor. The avodah, the work of service, was, he's saying that the Levites, since these are Levite clans, they used to sing as they would carry and assemble and dismantle the tabernacle, the Mishkan. Just like they used to sing on the temple steps, on the temple stairway, if you like, the steps leading up to the temple. And if you follow the morning service, at the conclusion of the morning service, there is always a psalm to be recited. In the Ashkenazi liturgy, after the Aleinu prayer, in the Sephardic liturgy, before the Aleinu prayer, and it says, Hashir shehayu sharim aleviim bebet hamikdash. The song, the poem that the Levites used to sing by the temple in Jerusalem on Sunday, on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, and Thursday. So first of all, they used to say, let's say today's Thursday, so the prayer text, the liturgy says, let's say Thursday, Hayom Yom Chamishi Beshabbat. Today is the fifth day of the week. Shabbat was meant in the context of week, but it's also a nice teaching to us that we should always have a spiritual orientation. Shabbat is a day of pure spiritual bliss, if we fully connect to it. Right? The sages call Shabbat me'en olam haba, a taste of eternity. If you truly immerse yourself on Shabbat, in prayers, in study, in camaraderie, if you truly give yourself the gift of disconnecting from the technology and worldliness and your phones and our phones and so forth, then what you get on Shabbat is this blissful cocoon. It's like an appetizer of eternity. It's going beyond worldliness. So every day it says they used to sing. So for example, today would be the psalm for Thursday, which we recited upstairs during the service, and I'll tell you exactly what it is since I can peek at the prayer book. Today we recited Psalm 81, which in antiquity was sung by the Levites by the temple. And there's a one verse in that Psalm 81 says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha Machem Tzitzaim Achev Picha V'Amaleu. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Widen your mouth and I shall fill it. What does that mean? What do you think that means? I am Hashem your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Widen your mouth and I shall fill it.
Fill it with spiritual,
right? With spiritual abundance, right? And so the Hasidic teaching would be that I am Hashem your God, not exclusively in the context who took you out politically, who emancipated you politically from Egypt, but rather I am the God who took you out of Egypt as in a sense of inner constriction. Open your mouth in praise, in song, in words of sanctity, in words of consolation and love to other people. Open your mouth in spiritual and divine service, and I will fill you and your entire being with spiritual plenitude and abundance. Right?
In a sense, like analogy to food, but spiritual.
Yeah, exactly.
Nourishment.
Yeah, it's spiritual goodies. Right. So, a goodie bag. So that's a beautiful thing that we have in our parsha. That's saying that there were two kinds of work. The work of the carrying, the technical, logistical, administrative work, and the work of the service itself. So, it's like, suppose that you're going on a retreat somewhere, and then you want to set the room for a Shabbat service. So you have to put in all the tables and all the chairs and make, you have to do some physical, logistical work, but ultimately it should be a vehicle for spiritual work.
Like sukkah, when we do sukkah.
Yeah, that's a very good example. That's an excellent example, because a sukkah is like a mishkan. It's like it's a temporary dwelling place, and it's a very technical, could be tedious endeavor to build it. But ultimately, the goal is not the technical building, is to bring Shekhinah into our midst, within us, in the sukkah, right? Sukkah represents the Shekhinah, the divine presence. So that's a great. That's a great teaching that we have in our parasha. We have two more sub-parshas, if you like, two more prevalent themes in our parasha that I want to touch upon. One is the very, if you like, sensitive, thought-provoking for our modern and Western sensibilities segment about the wayward woman. The wayward woman is called in Hebrew sotah, which literally could mean the deviant woman whom her husband suspects her of being unfaithful, and we have another sub parsha, another theme, which is discussed rather elaboratively in our parsha, and that's the category of the Nazir, Nazir. Maybe we should start with the Nazir. The Nazir was somebody who took a temporary oath or vow, a vow really. It's called neder in Hebrew, Neder, right? Neder is a vow to refrain from something for an X amount of time. For example, what's a very common vow had to do with booze, with alcohol. So Abram Cohen, just throwing out a name, would make a vow that he's not going to drink alcohol from May 24th, 2018 until August 24th, 2018. And then he would have to abide by that, right? Now, what would happen if they would, by mistake, drink alcohol? Let's say they went to somebody for Friday night, and they asked for grape juice, but the person got confused and gave them alcohol, and they drank wine. So they have to start counting the duration again. So the two most common vows that the Nazarites used to take that are specified are one is haircuts, not going to supercuts to get a haircut.
Here, he's a Nazarite.
There you go.
First hippies.
And the second one
This drink.
was drinking alcoholic beverages, like I mentioned. So alcoholic beverages, what could conjecture? Maybe people felt they overdid it. They wanted to, do away with it, And with the hair, it's a little bit more perplexing. Why would somebody not cut his hair if it's not a fashion statement or what have you? So there's actually a very interesting story in the Talmud of somebody who became a Nazarite, and he said he went to the river and he saw his own reflection, and he was struck. This guy may have been a Kohen, I don't remember exactly. He was struck by his own physical beauty. He was a very handsome man with a beautiful face, with beautiful facial features. And he felt that he got too much into himself. So he decided to make the vow of not cutting his hair, which is really interesting because, if you, first of all, some of us might be familiar with Lehavdil, the Greek myth of Narcissus. From that we have the clinical term of narcissism, right? So it's also used a lot in popular discourse. So a narcissist is somebody who's too steeped only on their own perspective and concerns in life, right? To put it very crudely. And modern psychology has it that narcissism comes from what the psychological literature called a narcissistic injury. Let's say somebody was emotionally neglected by their parents. They were emotionally unavailable. They would cry, they would want to play, they would never pay attention. They would always be on their phone, what have you, in an extreme way. So that person starts developing an inner deficit of attention and emotional warmth and empathy. And then throughout life, they have to protect themselves. They can't be empathic to others because they didn't get enough empathy. They weren't seen enough by their own parents. It's a very tragic thing because it's very difficult for people like that to develop relationships. So there's a Greek myth that Freud brings forth. And it's the story that it was the prince who looked at himself in the mirror, and he was so transfixed by his beauty, because in antiquity, it's not like everybody had mirrors at home, and they would look themselves in the mirrors, they brush their teeth and comb their hair in the morning. It was like once in a blue moon you would see yourself, in a reflection in the river, right? Or some pool of water, right? So the prince in the Greek myth was so transfixed by his own reflection, by his own depiction, that he froze and died and became like a flower, that's kind of stationed there. Because there's this type of flower that you can see in certain parts of the world that is kind of like curvy. It kind of like curves, and it looks like it's looking into the river. So that's probably how the Greeks came up with this myth. And what's a myth? It's a story that's not historically accurate. It didn't necessarily happen historically, factually, empirically, but it's true in the deepest sense of the term. It tells you something very true about the human condition or the human soul. So it may not be a factual story, but it tells you something deeply true about what it means to be human. So, who is the most famous Nazarite in Jewish history? Samson, right? And that's why this week we're going to read Bezat Hashem in the Haftarah, in the prophetic reading, the story of Samson's mother and how she yearned for a child. And I believe it was the prophet Samuel. Let me triple check so that I don't tell you something that's... so she actually encounters an angelic being, a malach. He is not named. So a malach in Hebrew means either an angel or an emissary. So the truth is, you meet someone in your life who enriches your soul. He is an angel. He's an emissary. And similarly, sometimes we have emissaries who are negative emissaries. But an angelic, a malach doesn't only necessarily mean an angelic being, a spiritual, non-corporal, metaphysical being. It could also mean somebody who, chances upon you in life's journey and empowers you in some significant way. So, we have here the story of a woman who is barren, and an angel, an emissary, tells her, the Haftarah is on page 1185, he tells her, I know that you're barren and you're having trouble conceiving, but you will conceive and it's going to be a boy. And here's the deal. Now you need to guard yourself and don't drink wine and liquor, which, by the way, is advised a lot today for pregnant women anyway, right?
Yes.
And don't eat anything that's not kosher, right? Because the son that you're going to have, he goes on to say on 1187, on verse 6, is going to be a Nazarite, Nazir Elokim. You see, he will be a Nazarite unto God. In what way? Min ha-baten, from the stomach, from the womb onwards. He's not going to consume alcohol even as a fetus. And he will redeem the Israelites from the Philistines. Again, who are the Philistines? These were originally, they were ethnically what we call today Greek merchant tribes who came from what the Bible calls Kaftor. Presumably, it's what we call today the island of Crete in Greece. And they used to settle along the coast of Canaan, of the land of Israel. The cities of Ashdod and Ashkelon in Israel today used to be historically Philistine cities. And Gaza was also Philistinian. Samson was tortured to death in Gaza. They took him to their main temple in Gaza. And the Philistines were pagans. They engaged in a lot of drinking, in orgiastic, very much the antithesis of what that Jewish holiness code.
When the Romans called Israel Palestine.
When was Israel called Palestine?
The Romans named it, called it Palestine. Did they get that from the Philistines?
Correct. They took it from the Philistines, and the idea was to eradicate and erase and to rip apart, to tear the connection between Judea, right, and the Jews, right? That was the idea. And that's how, throughout history, the Romans didn't invent that. People want to obliterate the indigenous people. They rename places in a new way. So notice something interesting here. The Philistines were a hedonistic culture. They tried to reach ecstatic state through alcohol and through boundless sexuality and things of that nature. And here he's saying, in order to fight the Philistines, we need a leader who's the antithesis of that. So it's something to think about. Now, there's a lot. There's a lot going on here. We know the tragic story of Samson, that he was seduced by a woman called Delilah, who was a Philistine, maybe harlot, and he fell in love with her, and she nagged him until he finally told her that his secret is of his fortitude lies in his Nazarite status, especially his uncut hair. And then she cut his hair, and then he was captured, and he was taken to the chief pagan Philistine temple in Gaza, and he was brutally, and savagely tortured, and they poked his eyes, the kind of things they used to do in antiquity. The ancient Near Eastern war code is not exactly the Geneva Conventions. They used to cut off the heads of the kings that they conquered. atrocities that today are not acceptable. Today we have rules of engagement even in warfare, right? So, and the civilized world tries to hopefully pursue them. So, in any ways, what's the famous, tragic, heroic ending of Samson? That he said, well, I'm being tortured to death anyway, I might as well take down as many Philistines with me as I can. Mm-hmm. And he prayed to Hashem to regain his legendary fortitude for the last time, and he leaned on both pillars, and the entire temple collapsed on the multitudes of Philistines who were there. And he said that it's a famous verse in the Bible, Tamut nafshi im plishtim, let my soul die with the Philistines. So it's kind of like when somebody is willing to make a supreme act of self-sacrifice. So in Israel to this day, they're saying it's as if this person says, let my soul perish with the Philistines. And to give you another historical context, there is a contemporary Jewish American journalist. His last name is Hirsch, and he wrote a book. Seymour Hirsch, that's his name. He wrote a book called Samson's Choice. You know what this book is about? It's about Israel's nuclear arsenal. That he's basically saying, the nuclear arsenal that Israel has, it's a deterrent. It's basically saying to the Arabs, you could never fully destroy Israel. Because if you were to fully invade Israel and destroy Israel and march into Tel Aviv and Jerusalem victorious, we could all die together because we will nuke you. It's a deterrence, right? A nuclear holocaust will all go under together. So it's a deterrence. And that's why Samson's Choice became the title of this book. So there are a lot of layers to this. Now it gets even richer than that, because let's say I made yesterday a vow not to consume alcohol. Supposedly I did. I didn't. Let's say I made yesterday from May 23rd until August 23rd for 3 months. So if I were to live in antiquity, when there was a temple standing in Jerusalem, then at the end of those 3 months period, whatever period I was in a Nazirite status for alcohol, what does it mean? It means I was in abstinence status, right? I would have to go to the temple and bring forth an offering. Now, why would I have to bring forth an offering? That's the question. And the question and the answer that some sages give is out of this world. Because the answer is that the Jewish view is that everything which exists in the world, it's one of the blessings, one of the 7 blessings, the Sheva Bachot, we say on the wedding, on the chuppah. We say, Baruch Atah Hashem. There's a beautiful tune that we sing on the chuppah. Baruch Atah Adonai Elokeinu melech haolam she'akol bara lichvodo. We bless Hashem as the sovereign of the universe, who created everything for His grandeur, to emanate His grandeur and dignity and majesty. So in other words, if alcohol is there, alcohol has a purpose. Right? If meat is there, meat has a purpose. If sexuality is there, sexuality has a purpose. And you have different religious traditions or spiritual traditions, non-Jewish ones, in which it becomes the spiritual holy thing to do would be to completely abstain from certain activities. Let's say in Islam, that would be consumption of alcohol, right? It's out unconditionally for perpetuity, right? Or in Catholicism, if you want to be part of the spiritual elite, become a priest or a nun, then you are to desist from having children or any sexual activity, right? Sexual intercourse. Buddhist monks, they're supposed to not consume meat at all, right? In Judaism, it's a very different approach. Judaism says, if something is here, then it's up for grabs. It has a purpose. And if we don't, then we're kind of rejecting something that God created. And if it's created, it must serve a significant purpose. It must have a spiritual dimension that we can connect to. There must be a way to channel this particular human activity or that particular product in a spiritual way. And that's exactly what we do with alcohol, right? On the chuppah, or on the bris, or on Shabbat, or Jewish holiday, you take alcohol, a worldly, sensuous delight, and you turn it not only into a sensuous physical delight, but also in a social delight, because it's a social communal gathering, and also a spiritual delight. And that's what Judaism does. The same thing with Shabbat, right? On Shabbat you're supposed to be like royalty. You're supposed to eat like Prince Harry and Meghan Markle ate last Saturday, right? You're supposed to eat in a regal fashion on Shabbat. So as King Solomon says in the Bible, in Ecclesiastics, in Proverbs, there is a time for everything. There's a time for fasting, like Yom Kippur, Tisha B'Av, for various different reasons. There's also a time for engaging in worldly, sensuous delights. And therefore, that's the reason, which I think is out of this world, that some rabbis give why the Nazir had to go bring an offering to Hashem. Because it's as if he's asking forgiveness. He's making atonement to God for not having capitalized on the opportunity to enjoy alcohol, not only sensually but also spiritually, right? And I think it's a very interesting thing about our tradition, that our tradition, doesn't shy away from those things. You see a lot of traditions, that just stay away from alcohol, just stay away from sexuality. The body is vile, it's lowly, it'll just get you into trouble. Judaism has a different approach. There is a way to kind of monitor and harness and utilize worldly delights in a measured way. Not for everyone. Some people, I think even, President Bush, for example, there are people, he'll never have a drink in his life because he used to have significant issues with drinking. So it's not saying that everybody should do it. You do have cases of, people that for whatever life background they may have, it would be advisable for them not to partake of X or Y or Z. But in general, the Jewish approach is, if it's there is a way for it to be used, celebrated, spiritualized in a befitting way. And that's what I call Judaism's sacred pragmatism. What does it mean, Judaism's sacred pragmatism? It means that Judaism is pragmatic, Judaism is flexible, Judaism understands human nature. You can't tell all of humanity today to go vegan, because it won't work, right? Because too many people like meat. Those who want to be vegan, they're vegan, God bless them. We had some great rabbis who were vegetarians, including Rabbi Kook, who was a master Kabbalist and the first chief Ashkenazi rabbi in the modern land of Israel. Another great rabbi who was a vegetarian was Rabbi Shar Yeshuva Kohen, who was nicknamed the Nazir because he took a Nazirite vow even in the 20th century. It's a long story. But for the, most people today still consume meat. And by the way, our tradition is that there's a midrashic, rabbinic tradition that Adam and Eve were vegetarian, and meat consumption started after the flood. And with Noah. And the idea is that, in primordial time, humanity only existed by vegetarian means, and there will be a redemptive time in which we will go back to that. But meanwhile, if you want to have meat that's slaughtered in a certain way, have certain kinds of meat of animals who chew on their cud and are not predators. You don't want to take on the energy of predators who just kind of consume their prey, right? All predators are non-kosher. The same thing with alcohol, right? Judaism says, you create those windows where it's really elevates the experience of alcohol. Sexuality on Friday night between husband and wife, Kabbalah says, is exquisite and is reflective of the spiritual union between God's presence in this world, the Shekhinah, and the Holy One, blessed be He. So, a lot of Kabbalistic language uses erotic imagery. So, it's something so Judaism doesn't say no to life's physical and sensuous pleasures. It says there is a way to partake in them in ways that will elevate us rather than leave us afterwards with a sense of void and regret. Right? If I eat a whole cake, I regret it. Right? If we don't control our erotic drives, we will regret it. If we don't control our alcohol consumption, we will regret it. So Judaism says there's a way to put it in a certain holy framework. And that's what I call Judaism's sacred pragmatism. It's very unique.
Rabbi, how you explain, I grew up Sephardic, and I grew up with the tradition, like you explaining sexuality, Shabbat, everything. How you explain to a man, a Jewish man, that never had that, slept with goyim, really, did whatever, and he says, that is the best life I ever had.
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Should that man go to the mikveh and clean up all the sins?
I don't know. We all have our own circumstances in life,
right?
And everybody makes their choices. We're all, there's a song by Sting, the pop star, called "Let Your Soul Be Your Pilot." Let your soul be your pilot; it'll guide you well. Now, in another parashat Balak, it says there. God says to Balak, to Bilam, who wants to curse the Jewish people, and there are dignitaries who pay him a lot to curse the Jewish people. He's asking God, should I go with these people? So it's very interesting. So God tells him, Lech ima anashim, which means go with the people. And what does Rashi say? Rashi says something very deep for all of us, for all human beings. He says, "B'makom she'adam rotzeh lilech, lisham molichim oto," which means wherever a person wants to go, that's where he's taken. That's for all of us, because we all do things in life that are not necessarily, beneficial for the long run. So it's like we all navigate our own ship, and wherever we want to go, we can go, right? We have our cars. But in general, mikveh is a very cleansing thing. There are men who go to mikveh every Friday. There are those before Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. There's very pious individuals who go every day to the mikveh, just because the mikveh is a very powerful meditation. Right? You go into the mikveh, you strip yourself of all worldly buffers, So, if you're a woman, you paint your nails, you scrub that off. If you're a man, you have a ring, a wedding ring, whatever ring, you take that off. And you're supposed to just immerse yourself in a natural spring of water, reconnect with your inner core, and come out enhanced, renewed, with elevated consciousness. Yesterday I was learning with someone a book that talked about being in the present, just focusing on the present. And I learned, it's very instructive book, because it says most of the time we rob ourselves of our lives. How do we rob ourselves of our life? I'll sit here and I'll just think about what happened to me yesterday, last week, or when I was a child. A lot. Or I will think about what I want to do when I'm retired and I can just go on holidays. So whenever you excessively just in your consciousness dwell on the past or fantasize about the future, you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to be alive now, to live in the reality of now, right? And that's a very deep thing, living in the reality of now. So in that book, it's called Reclaiming the Self, by Rabbi Dov Ber-Pinston, who's a contemporary great Kabbalist in New York. Highly recommend that book, Reclaiming the Self, by Rabbi Dov Ber, that's one word, D-O-V-B-E-R. The last word is Pinson, P-I-N-S-O-N. So he tells two stories there. One of a great Hasidic master that when he passed away, another great rabbi asked the deceased rabbi's disciples to tell him what was the greatest attribute of the Rebbe, of their rabbi. And they said something very interesting. They said, he wasn't necessarily a genius in one field, but he had that phenomenal ability to just be immersed in the experience of the moment. If he was playing with a child, he would be playing with the child. If he were praying, he would be immersed in the prayer. If he would be listening and trying to help out another soul, he would be completely steeped in listening to that soul. Right? So that's something, it's a very difficult quality to cultivate, to be present. Right? The philosopher Heidegger had a concept called present at hand. But what he meant by that was that we have objects present at hand, like my iPhone is present at hand, the book is, but we're talking here about being present at hand in sense of just being present, right? There's a famous quote that's erroneously attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. I don't remember offhand who exactly said it, and I'll paraphrase it. You might be familiar with it, right?
Coolidge.
It was the past is history. The future is a mystery, and now is the present. Now, do you get the pun? The present also, in not only the present tense, but also now is the gift. You understand? The gift is now. Do you understand what it means?
Yeah.
The past is history. The future is mystery, and now is a present. Now is a gift. You got it? So that's something very beautiful, and something that we really have to struggle with, because we have so many abilities now to distract ourselves.
Well, Lewis
right?
Mumford,
Sorry?
Lewis Mumford, I don't know if you've heard of him. Mumford?
No.
Never heard of him? He said, the past is the past, but the future is now. I guess he's saying that we don't know the future, so the future is now.
Right, exactly, because we procrastinate. So he's saying now. Yeah. I have a friend who had a tough childhood, and he was sent to a boarding school. And one of the things he was taught, like one of the mantras that they taught him that he felt very empowering, was live in the reality of now. Like you get up in the morning, make your bed. Right now, maybe live in the reality of now. I don't want to, be inaccurate, but I think we get the gist of it. Another story that we have about being present at the moment is a story of a Jew in medieval times who was taken captive by non-Jews, because there were certain places, especially in Europe, where they would kidnap Jews for money, because they knew the Jewish people are very sensitive to it. Just like today, in 2011, I believe, Israel released, I think it was before Sukkot, Gilad Shalit, one Israeli soldier, for 1,000 terrorists. We're that kind of people, because the Talmud says, he who saves one life, it's as if they saved the world entire. There's a story about Rabbi Soloveitchik's grandfather, who came up to the synagogue he served on Yom Kippur night, Kol Nidre night, and he gets up on the pulpit and he says to everyone, go home. He put cash on the pulpit on Yom Kippur. You're not supposed to touch money, on Shabbat or holiday. On Yom Kippur, and Kol Nidre, he puts cash on the pulpit and he says, go home and bring cash, because we have to redeem this person who was kidnapped, right? It's like, today there are places in South America, I think in Colombia maybe, they kidnap people, they put them in the jungle for years, they ask for monumental ransoms, right? So anyway, this Jewish guy was, medieval times, he was imprisoned, he was kidnapped, and at one point they said, we're going to cut you some slack. You can choose one day in which you can practice Judaism. So he didn't know which day. That's how the story goes. So he wrote a letter to a famous rabbi at the time. I think it was the rabbi whose acronym was there, Radbaz. I'm not 100% sure it was him. But anyways, rabbi wrote to him, and he said, and the guy was thinking, what day should I choose? Should I choose Rosh Hashanah? Should I choose Yom Kippur? Should I just wait for the next Shabbat? And he told him, as soon as you can. As soon as you get that letter, pick that day. So if it's, if it's today, then today we should pray Mincha, and today we should pray Arvit, and today we should give Tzedakah, and today we should try and reach out to other people. Today. The present is now. Right? There's a book, I think, by F. Scott Fitzgerald called Seize the Day. Right? So it's very much, I think, a Jewish spiritual perspective. So, going back to the Nazarite issue in our Parsha, there is an entire Mishnaic tractate, Masechta. There's an entire volume of the Mishnah dealing with Nazir. And what constitutes, some of it may feel to some of us as very technical. It's saying like, what is the exact formulations in which you make a binding vow as opposed to a vow that's not valid, right? And also, with regard to the portion within our parsha that deals with a wayward woman, it's Masechet Sota. That's also Masechet is a Mishnaic tractate. It's a volume of the Mishnah. So there's also one that deals with that specific category, which is again something that could be very challenging to modern sensibilities, because it talks about a person who was suspicious of his wife. She keeps on meeting Joe Schmo, and they always meet in Joe Schmo's house. She goes there to have coffee, supposedly, and she stays there long hours, and they're just the two of them, and he doesn't like it. The husband gets a wrong vibe. He doesn't know Joe Schmo. He doesn't really trust him, and he feels increasingly uncomfortable. and if he, reiterates it a number of times, and then there is this very kind of troubling ritual that he would take her ultimately with the priest to Jerusalem. They would make her drink those water called the Maima Me'arerim, like the accursed water, and if she was faithful, nothing would happen. If she weren't faithful, it would become torturous and deathly. It's a very troubling portion, and there's a contemporary scholar at Tel Aviv University who wrote a book about it called Hatekes Shelo Haya, the ritual that never was. And he claimed that the Sota ritual never took place, historically. There are certain things you find in the Torah. The Torah says, the sages say, in Midrashic works, they say that there are at least 3 things in the Torah that are written in the Torah, yet were never implemented in actuality, never happened. One is called the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the rebellious son who misbehaves, and supposedly his parents need to take him out of the walls of the city, and he's supposed to be stoned by them and the entire community. Said that never happened. Why is it in the Torah? Expound and you shall receive a reward. Drosh vekabel sachar. Look for some spiritual angle that you can derive from it. But never happened, never will happen. Another one is Ir Hanidachat. Ir Hanidachat means the city that was incited to become an idolatrous city. And then the Talmud says, and then the Torah says that you have to destroy all the inhabitants of the city, and not only the human inhabitants, also all the animals therein. So that's also, the rabbi said, never happened, never will happen. Why is it in the Torah? Expound and you shall receive a reward. And the third one they mention is in the context of the laws of leprosy. There were situations in which if leprosy was rampant with someone, they would destroy his entire home. So they say that never happened. Nobody's home was ever destroyed, right? In that context. So that maybe invites us to try and redeem the text of the wayward woman in ways that are more commensurate with our modern sensibilities. There is God's name was supposed to appear on the water after the woman drank from them. So Maimonides, I think, kind of had this in mind when he said that for Shalom Bayit, for peace in the home between the spouses, it's okay, it's quote unquote okay for God's explicit name, the Yud Hey Vav Hey, to be effaced. So Shalom Bayit is, Shalom Bayit, Shalom at home, is such a cardinal value in Jewish life and human life in general that sometimes it merits to really stretch oneself out of one's comfort zone in order to prevent all hell breaking loose in marital life and spousal life.
But this speaks about a fit of jealousy. This guy could be a paranoid character.
Right, and that's why, to remind us, what we have here is just the beginning, because this text, let's say about the Sotah, about the Nazir, is elaborately discussed later on in the Mishnah and in the Talmudic literature. And they start saying exactly, who is this guy? Who is this woman? Who saw this woman constantly meeting with this guy in private, even after people told her it's unseemly and her husband told her it's unseemly? So they go into greater detail and they kind of hone in and they elaborate. So what we have here is just like in very broad. The Torah gives us in very broad brushstrokes, and later on the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud, they kind of widen the scope in a very significant way.
One thing about the Nazarite did he have the status of a Kohen because he couldn't be with dead bodies?
Well, for that specific duration. Well, when it comes to a corpse, and actually, also a carcass, like bones of, I don't know, a cat or a dog or whatever animal was in the field, if you read some of the parshas, then you see that all Israelites were told to stay away from a carcass or a human body. And if they didn't, and if they for some chance came upon it, even stepped on somewhere where a person is interred underneath, they would have to go through an immersion in a mikveh, very esoteric kind of. I think it's in parashat Chukat that we have coming up soon, where we have the mitzvah of para aduma, the red heifer, which is a very esoteric mitzvah, which is a way to cleanse oneself of having been in contact with the deceased. Right? So, and then that person needs to immerse in the mikveh, and the person who prepared the remains of the burnt red heifer also has to immerse, and the person who took their clothes also has to immerse. But these things are not in effect today. For thousands of years they haven't been in effect because they, I think, well, first of all, we don't have the mechanisms we had then. We don't have a temple. But one of the reasons is, for certain things, the rabbis decreed that there are certain decrees that the general public cannot withstand. For example, it used to be the case that if a man had a nocturnal emission of seed, he would go and immerse in a mikveh. So that decree, that is no longer in effect, because then the rabbinic rationale is a very interesting one. They said it's a decree that the public cannot live up to, right? So the question of coming into contact with a corpse or a carcass is something that was prohibitive writ large for all Israelites. It wasn't part of the Nazarite thing. It was binding, for our entire lifetime at that point of our national existence, right? So, one last thing from today's parsha is that we find Birkat HaKohanim, right? The blessing of the Kohanim, that, in the Sephardic tradition, the male Kohens ascend to the Bima on every morning, weekday, Shacharit, every Shabbat, morning, Shacharit and Musaf. In the Ashkenazi community, outside Israel, it's really only done by the Kohanim on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the 3 annual pilgrimages, Shalosh Regalim, of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So, what happens is, the Kohanim, the entire nation would ascend to Jerusalem, let's say on Passover, and the Kohanim would go on and bless the entire people of Israel. Right? And the Birkat Kohanim, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, may Hashem bless you and guard you. Yair Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka, may Hashem illuminate shine His face unto you and be gracious unto you. Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Almighty uplift His countenance unto you and grant you shalom.
Shalom.
And shalom means a sense of integrity, of wholeness, of completion, of inner peace, external peace, divine energy, and integrity. And what's interesting is that on last Sunday it was Shavuot, and hard to believe. Sunday was Shavuot, seems like so far ago. And we read from parashat Yitro, the giving of the Ten Commandments, and God tells Moses and the people of Israel, all of you are becoming, I want all of you to be a kingdom of Kohanim. I want all of you to be spiritual aristocracy. All of you should strive for spiritual excellence, to be a spiritual elite. So in other words, it's incumbent upon every Jew to be a blessing and to bless others. Formally, ritualistically, only the Kohanim go and give that blessing. By the way, I saw that in the wedding in Britain of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, there was a choir that sang Birkat HaKohanim in English, right?
Gospel choir.
Yeah. So, no, I think it was the Anglican choir.
Oh.
And that particular blessing. But we are all called upon, the Shulchan Aruch, the halacha says we should recite at least 100 blessings a day, brachot, which if you do the 3 daily prayers with the Amidah, you have prayers after the bathroom, before you drink and eat, you're covered. So, and then the Hasidic teaching is that the word bracha comes from the word brecha. Brecha in Rabbinic Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, brecha means a swimming pool. In Rabbinic Hebrew, brecha means a pool of water. So it's like you fill yourself, water is life. You fill yourself with vitality. Most of our inner content is water. About 2/3 of our inner content is water. You give yourself life and vitality when you bless, right? That's why, any good physician will tell you to try and drink 2 liters of water a day. You want that pool of water to replenish your body. So you also need the bracha for a brecha, for inner replenishing. And it gives you energy. When you express a bracha to Hashem, out of gratitude, awareness, to cultivate a connection with Hashem, to live in a higher mode of consciousness, then you're replenishing your soul. And lastly, to be a bracha, to be a blessing, is the second mitzvah that the Torah, that God gives in the Torah to the first Jew and monotheist, to Abraham. The first commandment that Abraham received from on high, which is a commandment to all of us, of course, is Lech Lecha, embark upon a spiritual journey, right, for spiritual transformation and growth. And the geographical migration of Abraham is really the external facade, but the idea is to undergo a spiritual journey of transformation and renewal. But the second one is Veheye Bracha, and you shall be a blessing. And to be a blessing is a threefold thing. One thing is to be a blessing. We, the Jewish people, are called upon to be a blessing to the world. Ol Lagoim, a light unto the nations. We should be good, honest, contributing, loyal citizens of the United States and everywhere else we live, and be a blessing. Be a scientific blessing, an artistic, academic blessing, an economic blessing. We need to be a blessing. We're called upon to be a blessing. Secondly, we're called to be a blessing to people who come across our way in life. You see someone, maybe you can help them out, whatever trivial, banal way it may seem to you. That's also what it means to be a blessing. In the little interactions of everyday life. And lastly, to be a blessing means to be completely steeped in the bracha. When you say the bracha, that you're completely immersed in the spiritual experience. So if it's Friday night, you're saying the bracha, the blessing, over the challah, you really reflect about how God has blessed us, that we live in a time that we can just walk into a Ralph's and we can buy a chicken, kosher chicken. We can buy whatever we want. We can buy fish and we can buy bread. You know, my grandfather, they would only get chicken on Friday night, and his mother would divide it between the 6 children. So if you say the blessing over the challah and you really connect to the blessing, you become the blessing. You become so immersed in that spiritual experience that you're completely connected to the words you're saying and their meaning and their depth. That's the third part of what it means to be a blessing. So, you know, these are some of the chief highlights of our parasha. The carrying of the tabernacle by the different Levite families, the difference between the work of carrying and the work of divine spiritual service, the challenging sub-portion about the wayward woman, called sota in the rabbinic Torah-itic terminology, the Nazarite category, and the Birkat Kohanim. Okay, so we'll stop here for today.
Can I
Wish everyone Shabbat Shalom. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay.